Welcome to the March Cost Growth Target Technical Advisory Group meeting. Right off the bat, we want to acknowledge this is happening during spring break for a lot of folks. So we'll try to be prompt and get those notes and the video recording out to folks. I say this knowing that our February notes and video recording are a little late, but we'll get those up soon enough. We've had some technical difficulties on our side. All right, so let's get started. I'll just say this one more time, just because last month was our first meeting of the year. So if you missed that, the way we're going to do these cost growth target tag meetings is we'll skip our usual roll call. This tag group doesn't have a specified designated roster of members. It's compliance and technical staff from our data submitters, mostly our data submitters, coming and going and participating when they can. So we'll get the attendee list afterwards from the Teams meeting material. And we ask that if you are attending, please change your profile name, if you can, to include the organization you're with. That helps us keep track of who's coming and who's here. All right, let me screen share. Sorry, give me a moment. Okay, does everybody see the PowerPoint? And hopefully it's not the presenter view.
Yep, looks good, Trent.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so let's get started. So our agenda today, we have a couple program updates for you folks about the current 2021 data validation. Sarah's going to give some updates about other events happening for the program at large. And we're going to continue talking about 2022 data submission methodology changes. And that will, and I'll show you once again the tag schedule coming up later. It's continuing the topics we discussed last month. And all of that is to ramp up to the release of the new manual and new data template. So we have a couple items to discuss, and then that's it. We have a wrap-up meeting, and well, we'll talk about next month. Next month will be a lot more exciting because there is the draft template released and the draft manual. All right, so let's head on into program updates. So most of the files are in. We still have a couple data reporters, a couple of their files that are doing some last stage tweaks, but for the most part, all of our files and the majority of covered Oregon lives have officially passed the validation stage gate and are in the statewide file. So that's really great. Thanks to everybody for working your butts off getting that in. We know it was pretty tricky for some, so we really appreciate your efforts on that. This is just, so the last slide was the percentage of payer files. This slide is just to show that we have over, and I think right now it's definitely over this percentage, but as of last Friday, 78% of Oregon lives were represented in the finalized file. So these were members and their costs attributed to provider entities, or unattributed. Some were unattributed, but many of them were attributed. And that is the whole goal of this total cost of care data collection. So that's really great. And our next program update is about the advisory committee recruitment, and I'll hand this off to Sarah.
Thanks. So many of you know we have been in open recruitment for the new Cost Growth Target Advisory Committee since we launched that last September. We've had a number of conversations with the Oregon Health Policy Board about what the right composition for that committee is and what kind of membership we're looking for. This is no longer a legislatively mandated committee, and so there was no legislative direction in terms of what the committee composition should be. So after about 6 months of back and forth with the policy board and recruitment and talking to a lot of potential members, in March, we went back to the policy board and we presented an ideal committee composition matrix, which is a very wonky way of saying that we need to have a plan for who we're actually looking for on this committee and what kind of representation will make a appropriately diverse and representative committee. So the ideal composition matrix looks at representation across 3 different domains. Sector, so industry versus, not versus, but industry and non-industry, so consumer advocates, employers, purchasers, and other experts. We looked at expertise, so bringing the various backgrounds that we're looking for, including healthcare financing, administration, as well as affordability challenges, equity in policymaking. We also looked at demographic and geographic representation. So what is the right composition that will reflect the demographic and geographic distribution of the population in Oregon, and how can we make sure that this committee is representative? So the policy board approved the committee composition matrix. There's a link to what they approved on the slide here. And so now what we are doing is working with the board to review the applications, the applicants that we've received since September, relative to that composition matrix, and we will present a proposed membership slate to the policy board in May. Hopefully they will approve that slate and we'll be able to move forward with appointing the committee and convening it either in late May or June. So I think we finally have maybe broken through the back and forth we were having on what the right committee should look like, and we are getting closer to that appointment. So again, I know some of you have applied or have others in your organization that have applied. We're getting closer. Thanks for your patience and continued interest in the committee. Next.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, so next, let's jump into 2022 data submission. So the first topic we're going to talk about only concerns cost reporting for dual members. So this isn't going to be relevant for some data reporters if you do not have dual members. But I'll recap the situation. This did affect our CCO reporters, a couple other entities that were reporting for dual eligible members. So in 2021, after some back and forth about all the dual costs, we landed on keeping our reporting as it was in the manual. So the issue was, and if you're interested, you can visit our data submitter webpage, and there's a memo that was released in August of last year outlining the issue and what we decided to do about it after a separate meeting with data reporters. But capturing allowed amounts for dual payers turns out was not going to fully capture the total spending from payers to providers. And it was a little bit later in the season, so we decided that we were not going to change anything. If you were the primary payer for a dual member, you were going to report their allowed amount to us in the template, and we would take that data knowing that it was possibly an undercount of total expenditures for dual members, specifically Medicaid expenditures for members. So coming in, we promised like we were gonna revisit this for this year. We'll see what we can do to our guidance or the template. So here's what we have. So this year, to better collect all dual member payments to providers, we are revising our guidance, and we do not need to revise the template at all. So I'm going to show you on the next slide what that's going to look like. And we know, you know, if this is the first time you've thought about it since last September, take time to gestate on it. And if you don't have verbal feedback for us today, you could always email us. So this is new guidance for reporting costs in line of business 5 and 6. Those are our line of business 5 is the Medicare expenses for duals. Line of business 6 are Medicaid expenses for duals. So our new guidance is to use paid amounts for those lines of business. So last year, when reporting in those TME tabs, all the reporting was done for claims expenses by allowed amounts. We had a lot of discussion with CCO reporters and staff that were kind of in this, like really deep in the weeds with this mess. And this is the cleanest way to report it in the file. So we'll revise our manual for this coming data submission to specify that when reporting costs for Medicare expenses for duals and when reporting costs for Medicaid expenses for duals, you can use paid amounts. And again, that's because reporting allowed amounts for the primary payer, that would for many line of business 5 Medicare allowed amounts, it doesn't capture that additional amount to providers that many Medicaid secondary payers give. So we would like to hear, I know this was also some folks suggested reporting this way at the tag last year too. So we would like to hear after that. I know I just like went over it very, very quickly. Are there any concerns from data reporting staff about reporting duals this way? And keeping our report by allowed amounts for your other lines of business? Any initial reactions? And Gerandi or Sarah, I don't know if anyone has anything in the chat. Okay. Well, I will take, oh, is someone trying to speak?
Not seeing anything in the chat, but let's give folks a few more minutes.
Okay. And we'll be sure to go over this particular reporting guidance in our data submitter webinar this summer as well. So we'll definitely bring up this change whenever we can regarding the 2022 data submissions. All right. Well, if there's no reactions to this right now, We'll move forward, and if you take it back and have concerns, please email us and let us know. We believe reporting duals this way would alleviate our concerns of getting all of the duals costs while also making it easier for your technical staff to populate those cells for those members in our template. All right. So next up, we are going to talk about risk adjustment methodology. So I'll let Sam take it away.
Thanks, Trang. Yeah, so as we discussed in the February tag, we're considering some changes to the risk adjustment methodology that we used in 2021 for the 2022 file. And we're looking to get away from a full risk adjustment into a demographic only adjustment. So that's an age sex adjustment only. And so in this month's tag, we want to take a little bit more time to give you all a chance to reflect on that change and specifically anything regarding the implementation on your end and what that might look like for you. So we can go to the next slide, Trang. Let's just talk about what we did this past submission, and we'll discuss why we did it that way and why we're considering making the changes that we are. And then at the end, we'll get to the actual implementation, and that's where I'm very curious to hear from everybody. So what we did this year, as you all probably hopefully remember, was we used full risk adjustment that we applied to the claims when we rolled it up with the non-claims. We then measured across the years, and the measurement to our 3.4% cost growth target was fully risk adjusted on the claims end. And so that's what was measured against the cost growth target. That's what the risk adjustment themselves was provided by the submitters. So you each used your own in-house risk tools, or on the Medicaid side, we did provide the CDPS risk scores like we do on the OFA from the OFA side. And those were very commonly used, but not universally. Same thing with Medicare. We didn't provide anything, but the CMS HCC model was commonly used, but again, not universally. On the commercial side, there were a lot of different methodologies, a lot of different tools put into use. As far as why we are using risk adjustment at all, it should be pretty obvious, but like it was recommended by the implementation committee, full stop, to use some sort of risk adjustment, some sort of adjustment to the claims data so that measuring across years would be more uniform, and we'd be able to capture some changes in population. We can go to the next slide, Trang. They recommended measuring risk adjusted for payers from year 1 to year 2, and for providers. Something we didn't do this year, and that many of the people on this call aren't totally going to see, but we have talked about it in the individual meetings, is we're going to be having the same conversations with the provider entities, with the large provider entities, about the cost growth target once we get the data from all the data submitters. So we're having the conversations with you, and we're going to roll it up and have the conversations with the providers. However, the implementation committee, is what they recommended is on screen right here. They wanted to see a risk adjusted measurement for the providers as well. Obviously, we can't do a risk adjusted measurement for providers if every payer or if every submitter is using their own risk tool. They don't track across risk tools, obviously. So at the state and market level, we decided it wasn't that big of a deal. Those are stable populations. We don't need to risk adjust at that level. At the payer level, we want to do something. At the provider level, we also do. But if we do a full risk adjustment like we did this year, or this past year, I should say, then we can't roll up risk adjustment at the provider level. So we're sort of all in on payer adjustment and nothing for the provider adjustment. let's go to the next slide, Trang. I've already hit on some of these, and a lot of these are going to be pretty obvious, but these are for full risk adjustment. There's a lot of pros. There's also a lot of cons. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just it's nice to have that health status adjustment. Obviously, if you're patients, your members get a lot sicker 1 year from the next, you're going to spend more money. This is a way to adjust for that. Risk adjustment, and this applies to demographic adjustment as well, is reactive to the population changes, and is specific to the actual costs that you would see. There are a lot of cons for our purposes. Like I just said, we can't do a provider level adjustment if we do a full risk adjustment. There have also been a number of studies, especially lately, that we talked a little bit about last month, that show that a full risk adjustment health score, it's capturing a risk score growth, not actual health status growth. Massachusetts did a bit of a more of a longitudinal study, and found that the risk score growth in their state wasn't really tied to health status really at all, over I think it was like a 5 or 6 year period. And Rhode Island did a similar study where they saw health scores grow by 4.5%, 5%, when actual health statuses, people weren't actually getting that much sicker and needing that much more care. They were essentially just growing, or just measuring at that point how fast health risk scores are growing, which is not really the goal. And so on that topic, many other states are not using full risk adjustment. I think we're one of the last, as a matter of fact. Our neighbors up in Washington are going to be going with a demographic only adjustment. Massachusetts has moved away from adjustment at all. They're not even using demographics. While a lot of the other East Coast states are also going with an age-sex adjustment only. Another con of the way we did our risk adjustment this past year was it wasn't specific to Oregon costs. So it was more of a national base. CDPS is a national Medicaid risk score. It wasn't specific to Oregon or even the region. And that's the same thing with the Medicare CMS risk scores. So we're capturing maybe some of the health scores in other states across the country rather than anything Oregon specific. So what can we do about that is, potentially move away from a full risk adjustment to get to a demographic adjustment. Let's go to the next slide. So a demographic adjustment would just be an age band, and male, female only, similar to the table I have here. This is just a little mock-up to give you an idea of what your intake might look like. If this is the direction we go, we would use APAC data. I know, we've had this conversation so many times with all of you. You're providing all this APAC data. Why can't we just use that instead of having to do the submission process? Obviously the provider side of it is the reason there. So whenever we can, we do try to use APAC data. We know it's there. We want to use it too. This is one of the ways that we can use it. We can use the data that is in APAC to get Oregon-specific demographic factors and provide those to you, so that any adjustments you're making to the data will be actually specific to, hopefully more specific to the populations that we're trying to measure. We'd probably provide 3 of these tables, one for each market or one for each line of business. The Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial, and all payers would use the same demographic factors. So that way, that we're aligning with what the implementation committee wanted us to do. We are using an adjustment, and we're able to use that adjustment at the provider level as well. So we can roll everything up if everybody's using the exact same factors, and we don't have to worry about somebody's risk adjustment tool, their baseline is 7.0, where another is 0.0 or something like that. So everybody using the same factors, we can roll up successfully to the provider level, which is good for actually holding the accountability to the providers, and also aligns with the implementation committee and what we were sort of set out to do in the first place. So as far as implementation and what that would look like, let's go to the next slide. That's the part that we can only kind of guess what it would look like on your end. There would be no need for any payer provided risk tools, or your vendors, or however you're using your risk tools for this last file. You would only use the factors that we sent you for demographics. That we would in fact still need, and we want to do the confidence interval. That's another thing that is not really negotiable for us, is we need to do a confidence interval to make sure that we can say with some statistical confidence that if you're over the cost growth target, that you are 95%, for example, let's say, over that cost growth target. But to do that, we need a standard deviation, and that standard deviation has to come from you, and it has to be demographic adjusted, because we're applying it to the cost growth target, or to your cost growth, which is demographic adjusted or risk adjusted. And so therefore, to apply the standard deviation to get the confidence level, that also has to be demographic adjusted. So just another thing for you to think about of how you might apply our demographic scores to your data. And that might be one of the bumps in the road, but hopefully not. I think it's probably workable. There won't be any major changes to the templates. I know for some of our national submitters, our template looks in some ways very similar, but in some meaningful ways very different from some of the other templates, from the other submission templates that you have to do, because we're asking for a provider attribution tab. That means that we need you to do most of the risk score or demographic score application. We can't necessarily, we don't want to add 20,000 rows to this submission template, where you would be giving us the number of members for this provider A, at each of those age bands, and at each of those sex, male, female levels. So we'd be essentially blowing up the submission by like 10 times the number of rows that are already in there, and there are already a lot of rows in there, and it would probably really bog you down, and it would definitely bog us down. So because of that, we would actually need you to do the application of the demographic scores, which is why we'd be providing the table for your intake. I've done a lot of talking here, and I went pretty fast, but it's because I wanted to really get to this point, where we hear from you about any hesitancies you might have with intaking a demographic adjusted table or 3 for each market level, and applying them and then submitting back to us. So you can kind of picture how the submission template worked this past year, and then think about any hangups you might see as far as getting that file together and submitting it to us. So I'm going to stop here for now, and hopefully there are some questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but I'd be interested to hear from you.
I think I just had a question about prior year data. And so to the extent that we have our 2020 data as kind of a baseline for the next year, do we need to, I guess, rerun that or provide that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, we would be getting 2 years of data this year. We're always going to be getting 2 years of data this year from you. So this would just be another thing on top of that. So 2020 and 2021 are going to have to be submitted this year, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Just quick question. This is Deborah from Care Oregon. Age is a constantly dynamic changing construct. So please be clear about where the age is. Age end of year. Those kinds of things will be really helpful in our own implementation on this end.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it'd be a monthly snapshot of age, and we can add some detail to our manual or our FAQ to get that. If like a monthly snapshot of age where you can apply those factors monthly is burdensome, that's something we would need to hear about from you. But I think applying it at the member month level would be our expectation.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mhm. This isn't going to be your last chance to chime in. We always have our email inbox, and I'm not cutting this short. I'm just stalling for other people to maybe find the mute button. There's inbox, there's other tag meetings, there's others. There's still stage 3 validation meetings. So there are a lot of opportunities to take this back, chew on it a little bit, and think about the implementation.
Yeah, this is
So-
Greg Daniel with Kaiser, and I put a little jot in there as I'm thinking it through in just terms of how to go about capturing data and everything. If you're trying to look at it and say what age is each person in a month, you're taking every single person. You've got to basically split up and come up with a factor that's going to be applied for them. So you're now requiring capturing, I think, an awful lot of data per person. In the past, we looked at a person and we said, well, their risk level during this year is a certain amount. And I think you're blowing it up quite a bit by sitting there requiring that level of detail.
Yep, that's kind of what I need to hear. If that does seem like within your systems, it would be a burden. That level of detail, I think, might be overkill. We could get around that pretty easily. I think with most other risk tools, they do gosh, somebody on here might know better, a beginning of year or end of year. I'm trying to remember my Medicare days. If it was the end of the year, your age at the end of the year would be how it's applied. If anybody has a better idea on that, we can take it back and look into it, though. I'm not surprised to hear that it might be a big ask to redetermine somebody's age every month.
I would recommend personally doing the end of the year. I think that works fairly cleanly.
Yeah, if people are already, if the submitters are already kind of looking at end of year as somebody's age, that's an easy way for us to go, and I think that would be just fine.
Yeah, this is Don from Providence. I know the risk scores sent to us, the weekly risk scores, had one risk score for every single month of the year. So it appears to be taken at the end of the year and just papered over for the remaining months, foregoing months of the year. So.
Great. Yeah, we can take that back and make sure that end of year is what we're looking for. I think it is. I'm seeing some chatter amongst my team that makes a lot of sense. So I think end of year would make a lot of sense, and that would be fine with me. I think it's a wash at that point. And we would add that to the manual. There would be some changes to the manual, but like I said, any changes to the actual template will, because of a change from risk adjustment to demographic adjustment, we'll try to keep to a minimum. But there will be new tables sent with the actual template. There will be a tab that has maybe the demographic adjustment tables. And so that'll be built into any files you receive from us. I'm curious to know, did anybody look at the age? Trent, can we go back just one slide and look at the age bands? This isn't this isn't going to be for sure what everything looks like. We have to get into the data a little more to make sure that, like, you know, on a regression sense, this makes sense. This is fairly standard among demographic factors in the industry. This also aligns with what some of our other states are doing. So hopefully this age band level, nobody has a problem with this kind of span. But I'm interested in hearing that sort of thing.
This is Greg Daniel once again. I'm looking at this, and when I think about commercial, many times this would be very good for a commercial type of one, where you sit there and start getting into, say, Medicare, and the age bands can you definitely have a, we'll say, steeper curve of cost. Having 10-year blocks may be a little bit wide for those higher cost people.
Yep. Okay. I appreciate that. We'll definitely look at as many age blocks as we can to see when it stops really being impactful. But we don't want to give, you know, an impact for every single age. We do want to do age bands, but we don't want to be again overly burdensome with how many we're giving you. And we want to make sure we have a big enough population that we feel it's statistically relevant.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. These are really good comments.
Yeah, I think so. My takeaways are we're gonna make sure that end of year is what we would want as far as age is concerned, but then the actual size of the age bands, especially for Medicare, where it gets a little steeper towards the you know 50, 55, 65, 75. We'll take another look at that to make sure that we're happy with the age bands we've selected. I'm seeing another comment here. So Deborah says, wondering if the demographic score significantly accounts for birth delivery costs that are overrepresented, especially since 50% of deliveries statewide are paid for by Medicaid. That's a good question. I imagine there will be some we're not going to be able to account for all the costs associated with birth and delivery. So I think you're right to assume that there's going to be some estimation of the costs specifically for Medicaid. And I think that's one of the things that's sort of built into getting away from a risk adjustment cost and getting into a demographic cost. I'm seeing Sarah has come on screen now.
Yeah, I have a thought. Sorry.
Yep.
I think it might be good to reground in that the point of the adjustment, whether it's the risk adjustment tool or the demographic adjustment, is not to fully account for all costs or outliers, but to make sure that we are adequately understanding change year over year. So I think, yes, there might be birth delivery costs that are overrepresented in a specific group, but unless that group changes wildly year over year, in the comparison that we're looking at, I think it might wash out. And Sam, you can probably say that in a more technical, accurate way than I can, but I just wanted to come back to that point that the purpose of the adjustment is not to completely control for every single thing. It's to make sure that we're tracking major changes year over year between the population groups.
I think that was very well said. So it doesn't need to be technical. It can be exactly what you said. That you're right. We're not going to be able to account for every single cost. If your population, if you're a CCO and you have a Medicaid population that has a boom in birth rates from one year to the next, you might see a costs go up significantly that we can't account for, that even risk adjustment wouldn't be able to totally account for. But that's something that you can let us know. Hey, we saw 500% more births in this year than we did last year. And that's accounting for, you know, this many dollars, which is this percent of growth over the cost growth target. If you wanted to get into that level of detail, I'm all for hearing that types of stuff, that specific types of numbers. But yeah, even risk adjustment isn't going to account for, or isn't going to smooth out that big of a bump that's going to affect the overall cost growth. Rebecca says that 19 to 39 is a wide band, and you're absolutely right. I was surprised to see such a wide band in some of sort of the standard tables that I was seeing out there. I have yet to get into that specific area and get to measure that, so that might be broken down into smaller bands. We might get into 5-year age bands, or even break that into just a 10-year, 2 10-year age bands. Especially for the commercial population and the Medicaid population. So yeah, that's something we're going to look into, Rebecca. Thank you for calling that out. Okay, I think we've trickled to very few comments. You can keep them coming in the chat. I'll be in there. Or as I said, we have other tag meetings. We have an email. So let us know what you find out.
All right, thanks, Sam. And thanks everyone for your feedback. We're gonna move on next to some data submission changes, and we're gonna spend most of our time talking about validation. So before we do that, just want to call out the 2 big guidance changes for 2022 reporting in September that we've already talked about today. So that's going to be how to report dual member spending in those claims categories. And then what Sam just went over, risk adjustment using demographic factors, age and sex. So those are the big guidance updates for this year. Moving on to some template changes. Based on discussion last year and discussion and feedback at last month's February tag meeting, we are updating the Rx Rebate Tab to provide this optional field to allocate pharmacy rebates to provider entities if payers have that information to report that. I will note you do not have to use this field. This is an optional field, and having this field in the Rx Rebate tab, if you were reporting the same as last year, you can still do that in this tab, which is the beauty of option 1. I think it was option 1 last year. So that is the big change to this pharmacy rebate tab. Does anyone have any questions? We could go on to data validation, everybody's favorite. So last year, data validation, and for a lot of folks, it continued onto this year. So at the top, you'll see kind of a mock-up of what our tab structure looked like. Our tabs, especially those 3 total medical expenditure tabs, were interrelated. They capture data that kind of links up to each other. They have to reconcile and align. And a lot of our data validation were, not just formatting or is this a valid value for this cell? It was validation checks to make sure that these tabs lined up for people. So last year was our first year collecting this. It was the first year for many of you reporting this. The validation process was very manual for all of us. And we needed to make sure we caught all of those discrepancies if there were discrepancies. So it was a lengthy process. There was a lot of back and forth to clarify data issues. a little bit like riding your bike down this cobblestone path. But hopefully this year, imagine a beautiful sunny day. It's cloudy and rainy here in Oregon, but maybe it's sunny where you are. You know, clouds, it's fine. But imagine riding that bike down this path. I guess I should have drawn a little bump. I guess we can't promise smooth sailing this year, but we've drastically changed our validation process for you and us. So it'll be a much smoother ride this year. So some of the changes are front loading those validation checks so you can see what your data file looks like. If you look at the top of this tab little snapshot, you'll see 3 new tabs titled Validation, Provider Check, and Weighted Risk. So a lot of our validation got held up in that stage 1 validation check. And we, you know, and if we found something and if it needed a resubmission, we would go back and require a resubmission. And a lot of times this happened multiple times, which is okay. But we would all like to have it reduced. So these validation tabs let you see whether you pass or fail those checks. So you can check before you submit to us. And if it looks great, you can rest assured you'll fly through validation. So that's one big change, these validation tabs. Another big change is going to be pre-booking, pre-scheduling our data clarification meetings. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But we want to talk about and show you what these validation tabs will look like. And kind of maybe get people excited for the draft template that we'll provide next month. And to talk through these validation tabs and what those tables look like, I'm going to hand it off to our analyst, Liz McCarthy.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Trang. So like Trang said, during the validation process, it was a little bit clunky. We were all learning, and we learned a lot, and hopefully you guys did too, about how to kind of put together this file and how to check this file to make sure everything kind of added up. So what we decided to do is we took all of our stage 1 checks. So making sure the relationship between the TME all, the TME prov, and the TME unattributed tabs all lined up. And we actually put these into spreadsheets and auto-populated tables that you can then take a look at when you are done inputting your data into the template. You can pop over onto these validation and provider check tabs to see, are there any issues? These are the same issues that we check for in our stage 1. And so this way you can kind of take a look at this and go, is my data clean enough? Does it, line up and everything looks good? And then you can submit it to OHA. So the first tab is the validation tab, and it contains 3 tables. The first one is probably one of the bigger ones, which is the relationship between the TME all tab and then the TME prov plus the TME unattributed tab. And so all of these cells are auto-populated with the data that you put in those respective tabs, so you don't have to do any calculation on your end. So hopefully it's a little bit easier for everyone. And any issues will show up as a different color, or something will visually bring to your attention that, hey, something may be a little bit wonky. Trang, can we go down to the next slide? So the next table in this validation tab, so if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the weighted risk score average. So this will be the weighted demographic score average, if we can use the demographic scores that Sam was just talking about. And so what this takes a look at, it's another comparison between the TME all and then the TME prov and TME unattributed tabs, but we're making sure that the weighted risk scores between the TME all and the TME unattributed tabs equal the weighted risk, or the risk score mentioned in TME all. So once again, if anything kind of funky pops up, you should be able to easily visually see that and see if there are any issues. And then if you scroll down a little bit further in this same validation tab, you'll have the last table. And this is to compare the member months from TME All and compare that to the data in the market enroll. So originally we looked at just do all the total member months add up, but we realized that we weren't just wanting to look at just do all, the member months for the year lineup, but we also wanted to break it down by line of business or market type. So we created four different types of markets. So we have Medicare, Medicaid, commercial, and duals. And we have those lines of business that are respective to those categories, as well as the market enrollment title from the market enroll tab. And so we add up the data from the two tabs and we can show the difference. And like I said, all of these cells are auto-populated. So this hopefully should be a pretty quick check for you to see if everything looks okay. So the next tab is another big thing that we saw is that there are some provider organizations listed in TME Prov that did not have corresponding information in Prov ID. And so what we put together is this table that compares the unique values located in TME Prov and to check to see if that information is available in Prov ID. So this is a little bit bulky for the table, so you actually do have to scroll down through all of the list of provider organizations. If they match, you should see the provider organization in both columns. If it doesn't match, you'll see this very bright red not in Prov ID in that second column, and that'll give an indication, oh, I'm missing this TIN. I can go back into the system, populate it into the Prov ID tab, and double check. All right, so those are the two main the validation tabs that I think you as the providers, the payers, submitters, will be utilizing. The last tab that we created is this weighted risk tab. And this just does some of the calculations that are required for the second table in the validation tab. So it takes the information from TME Prov, does a little bit of calculations, and then is able to spit that information out so that we can use it in the finalized table in the validation tab. Like I said, with all three of these tabs, they're all auto-populated, so hopefully it's easy. You don't have to input anything. Nothing has to be done on your end other than inputting your data in the previous tabs. So the TME all through the Prov ID tabs. All right, so this is just a draft. We are hoping to have this available for everyone to review and to kind of play with by mid-April. And we are reserving some time during the April tag to discuss the new template. And if you guys have any suggestions or, hey, I also do this check, can we incorporate this? We would absolutely love to hear that. Our goal with this is to make it as efficient for both you and us, OHA, to get this data into a clean state so that we can easily validate it and get it ready so that we can do the analysis. So hopefully a little bit less work on everyone's part. So now that I've spoken a lot, does anyone have any questions? Any comments? Okay, I'll take that silence as a good thing. So
Maybe
all
they're
right,
waiting for the draft.
yeah, I think that's we're probably hear a lot of comments when you see the draft. But thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to Trang.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so as Liz said, we'll revisit this again in April, and we'll get a draft out to this group sometime during mid-April. Okay, so that was front loading a lot of those stage 1 checks, stage 1 being our biggest, we spend the most time on that. Another change we're doing this year relevant to the validation process in general is scheduling. It's basically scheduling. This slide is a recap of our 2021 data validation process. You might remember this diagram from a presentation last year. This light blue row represents stage 1 checks. Stage 2 is kind of the soft teal, and then the bottom row, that's a grassy green, is stage 3. The stars represent points in the process where we had meetings with you. If there were data discrepancies in stage 1, which most of us, we did have this meeting. And then the next time we spoke with you was for the stage 3 meeting. I put the big star up here because this ended up taking a lot of time for everybody, not just having a meeting, but sometimes having multiple meetings after a V2, and we had to meet again, and then a V3 was submitted. So to make this process more efficient, oh, this is just a summary slide of information I've already presented. So most payer organizations needed 1 resubmission, and 45% of entities needed more than 2 resubmissions. So if you were feeling not great, it's, you definitely, it wasn't a lone thing. It wasn't like one, particular entity. This is a complicated folding of the data to submit. And if we've spoken, I like to liken it to origami cranes, or I think I've used frogs sometimes, and refolding of it, submitting it again. And sometimes, yeah, there's just multiple cranes. So for this coming year, to get from this slow, clunky journey to a hopefully smoother journey in and out of validation station, we have the checks and then the booking of the meetings. The booking of our data meetings will change the downstream process of validation a lot. So here is what that looks like. So this is the same diagram as before, but as you can see, the payer staff, will do this stage 1 self-check using the tables created, the validation tabs in the template itself before you submit to us. And when you submit to us, we will continue the checks. We'll be able to do the stage 2 outputs. And we will schedule a tentative meeting to meet with you. Based on what the data looks like, this meeting might be a data clarification meeting, and a resubmission might be necessary. Or if everything looks good, this meeting might be a stage 3 meeting, in which case we'll be able to discuss the stage 2 outputs, resolve any questions you or OHA may have, and we'll finalize the file. So to do this, we are going to pre-book these meetings between stage 2 and stage 3. So we are aiming to schedule meetings within 1 to 3 weeks after receipt of the CGT file. So these files are due September 2nd. And so we're considering November and December have holidays and traveling going on, we're going to try our best to really compress that validation back and forth between both of our teams to finalize the file in the fall as efficiently and quickly as we can. And the ultimate goal is to finalize the files before the end of the year. So we want to present this change in the validation process so folks on your team can be ready to schedule these meetings. Some of you did pre-schedule meetings for this first submission, and thank you for that. Actually, when we look at the time spent for validation, having pre-scheduled meetings on the books greatly compress the validation window for those entities. So we're hoping to try to spread this out and do it for everybody. You don't have to wait to give us dates. If, you know, sometime later in the summer, sometime in August or whenever, if you already know on your side that you're going to submit the file, you have the team members that should be at these meetings. If you want to contact us in August and say, hey, we want a meeting with you September 10th. And we'll check to see if our team can accommodate that, and we will reserve that time for you, and you'll be on your way. So throwing that out there, get ready for that. And hopefully the validation process this second submission cycle will be a lot better. Are there any comments from folks on the line right now? All right. Hopefully when this hit your ears, it elicited a positive reaction. I know our validation team is definitely looking forward to implementing this fall. So hopefully your team will too. All right. And with that, that is all we have. That is the end of our meeting. Our next meeting is April 27th. We will provide the draft of the 2022 version of the template and the manual, also known as the data submission guide. I saw somebody in the chat referred to it as a DSG. So we'll give that to you folks. We'll have space in the April meeting to talk about it. And April, we also have time for to talk about the the PIP template and the process of performance improvement plans. And then we'll also reach back and talk about the list of reportable, accountable provider entities. And the last two slides are just a continuing schedule of the TAG work plan. We're gonna keep putting the schedule at the end of these slide decks so people can grab it and look at it very quickly. Are there any comments before we depart? Sarah, did you want to add anything else?
I did want to also let people know that we sent out the public meeting notice for our first cost growth target public hearing. We will be holding that on April 8th. Some of you might have received that notice. We're also going to send out a message to the cost growth target interested parties probably later this afternoon. So if you didn't already get it, you'll get it later this afternoon. This public hearing, it's a virtual meeting, and it's going to focus not on performance against the cost growth target, but on the impact of healthcare cost growth on Oregonians and what are some of those effects that people are experiencing. So medical bankruptcy, delay in care because of costs, really going to focus on hearing from consumers on what high costs mean to them. So you are all invited. We ask your help in spreading the word to your networks and those who might be interested, and that invite will be pushing out to you directly later this afternoon. I think that's it from me, Trang. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, and with that, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us and participating in another TAG meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.